Well, here we are at Silverstone, the racing track.
Keir Starmer needs you. He's had 4 years to tell you his plan. Has he got one, or is he hiding it from you?
Clear plan. Bold action. Secure future.
We have just seen the Tory Manifesto launch. This is where Boris Johnson actually wanted to do his manifesto launch back in 2019. Ultimately, they didn't do it. Around us all are the standings. I can see the racetrack over there. Actually, Brad Pitt, we are told, is filming somewhere on this location or has been recently. This is a really big moment in the race. This manifesto is one of the last chances the Tories have of closing the gap on Labour. The key question is there enough in this to change the dynamics of the race? I put that question to Rishi Sunak.
Ben Morley-Smith from the Telegraph. Manifestos are about policies, they're also about politics. There's 4 weeks to go, you're 20 points behind in the polls. What do you say to those who say the manifesto isn't ambitious enough and that this won't be a game changer?
Well, Ben, just to repeat what I said before, right, the tax cuts that I went through, tax cut for everyone in work that will be worth £1,300 in the next Parliament as we halve national insurance, tax cut for the self-employed where we abolish the rate of self-employment, a tax cut for everyone who's wanting to start buying their own home as we abolish the stamp duty for first-time buyers up to 425k, a tax cut for families to support them as they bear their young children, and a tax cut for the millions of pensioners in our society. So yes, I do believe that is bold, and that comes on top of the action we've taken to secure our borders, to get flights off to Rwanda, a new migration cap, and a more proportionate approach to net zero. But the choice of this election is clear, because all elections are ultimately a choice. Either Keir Starmer or I are going to be Prime Minister on July the 5th. If I'm Prime Minister, you will have this bold action. All you've got from the Labour Party is a blank sheet of paper.
Having been through the document, one of the first things that stands out is actually how many of the announcements the Tories have already pulled forward in the campaign. Usually in races, there is one big moment, the manifesto moment, when everything's unveiled. The Conservatives have actually taken a different approach to this race. They have drip-fed announcements from day one, pretty much. So we've had national service, we've had this promise to keep the state pension untaxed, and various others. They've been trying to change the polls, to trigger a comeback. It hasn't really happened yet. But what that means is when you get to manifesto day, actually going through this document, most of it we already knew. So that makes it tricky when you're trying to dominate the headlines, dominate the broadcasts, and somehow cut through with a new message. So let's look at one of the big measures in here. It's a tax cut, but no, it's not inheritance tax, and no, it's not income tax. It's actually something more specific. It is national insurance for the self-employed.
In the next Parliament, we will scrap entirely the main rate of self-employed national insurance.
Now that's interesting because some of those other measures may have been more eye-catching. But the Prime Minister is trying to build on this idea. He has a plan, and the plan is to reduce national insurance. Remember, he cut it back in the autumn, he cut it back in spring, and ultimately they want to get rid of double taxation. They think this idea on something structured, building on past work, is more convincing to the public than suddenly promising to cut a random tax.
We Conservatives want a Britain where setting up a business is as natural as taking a job.
But when you look at some of the details, possibly it's not actually as appealing as it suggests. They're getting rid of the main rate of self-employed national insurance. That's if you earn up to about 50k. If you're earning over about 50k, then you will still pay that tax. So the fine print perhaps isn't as exciting as it was made to suggest. The big question for Tory strategists is, was this the right tax cut to pick? Will it smash through to the electorate and change the dynamics?
That is why if you vote Conservative on July the 4th, the flights removing illegal migrants will depart in July.
Another thing that stands out in the manifesto is how Rishi Sunak hasn't bowed to the Tory right on reform on one particular area, the European Convention on Human Rights.
And if we are forced to choose between our security and the jurisdiction of a foreign court, including the ECHR, we will always choose our nation's security.
Right-wing figures argue that if the UK left that convention, it would be easier to tackle the small boats crisis. Downing Street, despite all the calls for that, have effectively said we're not going to go that far. Instead, they have this quite caveated position. If the European Court tried to block Rwanda deportation flights, then possibly they would consider what to do next. But they very clearly not explicitly propose leaving the ECHR. Tory moderates will be pleased by that, but those on the right may be critical. Let's step back and look at the wider picture, and I think the key question is this. Are the public really listening and willing to change their mind? There is very little in the polls in the last 18 months to suggest they are. Remember, think of all the moments we've had in the past. Rishi Sunak's conference speech last autumn, his tax cuts in the autumn and the spring, the decision to call this snap election, all of the policies of the last fortnight, and now the manifesto. Up to this point, nothing has eaten into that Labour lead. Will the manifesto really change things? Let's see.